Hi, it's Tanya here. Today I am vlogging about a book, Separate is Never Equal, Sylvia Mendez and Her Family's Fight for Desegregation by Duncan Tonatia. He both wrote and illustrated this book. Um, you can just look at the cover and tell that this is going to be a powerful story. There's some amazing pictures in it. I would recommend doing a picture walk with your students before reading the book just to give them some background of what they're going to be reading about and to bring out some questions that they could start to think about while they're reading. Um, but here's Sylvia's family. It's Sylvia and her two brothers. Here's the school that they went to, that they were forced to go to. And here are the white children in the school that they were going to. And so the story starts off with Sylvia actually going to Westminster School in California. And this was after it had been integrated. So it's her first day there. And she gets nasty comments from some of the children. One of the boys, when she first walks in, tells her that she doesn't belong there and she needs to go back to the Mexican school. So she's very upset and comes home and says to her mom that she doesn't want to go there, that the kids are mean. And her mom says to her, don't you know that is why we fought? And so then there's a flashback, and it goes to how Sylvia's family had moved to Westminster, California. And I want to see what year it was that they moved, because 1944. And they went to the school to register. Her aunt actually takes her to the school with her two brothers, and then she has two girl cousins that her aunt is also trying to register. Well, they get to the school, and the white school secretary at Westminster School says, okay, here's two forms for her two cousins. But Sylvia and her two brothers are going to have to go to the Mexican school. So Sylvia doesn't understand. She says, well, in her mind, I'm born. I've been born in America. I'm an American citizen. I speak good English. Why do I need to go to the Mexican school? And then she, looks at her cousins, and she's trying to figure this out. Her cousins have lighter skin than her. And so the secretary decided that they could go, but because Sylvia and her brother have darker skin, they weren't going to be allowed. And one thing that struck me about Sylvia's family is that her aunt is very angry and decides, well, if Sylvia and her brothers can't go, then my two girls aren't going there either. And so this whole story is really powerful because you really see how this whole family comes together to advocate for the rights of these kids. So they go home. Sylvia's aunt tells her dad what happens. Her dad has worked years as a farmer, as a field worker, and has worked his way up and has now owns his own farm. So he tells his Sylvia's aunt, well, I'll figure this out. I'm a businessman. I know how to deal with these kind of situations. I'm going to go to the school and figure out what's going on. So he goes to the school. He goes to the principal. He goes to the school board, talks to the superintendent. No one will give him an answer of why his children can't go to the white school, but they insist that they need to go to the Mexican school. So he can't get an answer. And so the whole family comes together to figure out how to fight this. And so I kind of want to talk about some of the pictures that are in here as they're advocating to allow Sylvia and her brothers to go to the white school and advocating for other kids to be able to go to school. So first of all, there was a big difference between the two schools. And they're upset about it because you can even see from the front cover how pretty the white school looks, how nice And then you can kind of see this looks kind of like a rundown shack, the Mexican school. Another difference that's pointed out in the book, when she had walked into the white school the day that they were trying to register, they noticed how pretty the trees were. There was a playground with a swing. The hallways were nice and clean. When they end up going to the Mexican school, it's surrounded by an electric fence because there's a cow pasture behind it. And it's just like a clapboard shack. The halls aren't spacious, they're clean. And, her dad talks about that it's an inferior school, how the teachers aren't prepared there, that people aren't worried about their children's education and that they expect them to drop out by 8th grade. So here's the first picture I really want to show that I think is super powerful. It shows how the Mendez family is coming together to advocate, but it also shows how when they're trying to talk to other families whose children are being forced to go to the Mexican school, how because they work for white farmers, they have fear of joining the Mendez family because they don't want to lose their job. So even though going to the school, going to Westminster School would be better for their children, they don't want to join the fight because they don't want any problems. They don't want to make things worse off for their family. So let me show you this picture. Let me start. Sorry, I have to figure out how to navigate. Here's a picture of Sylvia's dad. He's holding a petition. And I don't know if you can tell, but the petition has no signatures on it. He's trying to get signatures to say we need to integrate schools, that it shouldn't matter what color your skin is or what your background is. Everybody should have equal rights in education. And then you could see the whole family's together, mom, dad, the boys, and Sylvia. Here, you can see the family they're coming up to, trying to get them to sign the petition. And they've got their backs to the family. They don't want to sign the petition because they don't want any trouble. So it shows, how, there's this privilege for the white children to go to school, and how the Mexican families are afraid to do something that they know is going to be better for their kids, but they're also depending on the jobs they have because of who the white men that they work for, the white families that they work for in the fields. They don't want to lose their job because they're fighting for equal rights for their kids. And so I think about what a tough decision, as a parent, you want to be able to provide for your children, but you also want them to have the same opportunities as other people. And having to make a decision like that, it's got to be probably one of the most torturous, heartbreaking things as a parent, trying to figure out, what is the best way for me to go. Another picture I want to show is this picture, because in the story, what ends up happening is, so they try to get Sylvia's dad organizes and tries to get people to sign this petition. He's having trouble doing that. He meets a truck driver, and I'm just going to read you what happens. One day, a truck driver overheard Mr. Mendez trying to convince a worker to sign his petition. Said the truck driver, you could file a lawsuit. So he's having all this trouble trying to get people to sign the petition. Truck driver says you could file a lawsuit. The truck driver told Mr. Mendez about a lawyer named David Marcus, who had filed a lawsuit on behalf of people in San Bernardino and had helped them integrate the public pools there. At that time, not only were schools segregated, but other public places as well, such as pools, parks, and movie theaters. Some businesses even had signs that read, "No dogs or Mexicans allowed." Mr. Mendez decided right then and there to hire Mr. Marcus, even if it meant having to spend all of his savings to do so. And so, I mean, just to me, the line talking about the signs that read "No dogs or Mexicans allowed," um, like how demeaning that is. But then the artwork that goes along with this really shows um, the disgusting racism that was happening, and how demeaning it was to these families and to these children, um, having to put up with this. I'm going to show you the picture. Here's the lawyer, Mr. Marcus. And so that's the lawyer that the Mendez family ends up hiring. And the sign that says "No dogs or Mexicans allowed." And then it shows a picture of the pool that was segregated. You can see all the white kids playing in the pool and having a good time. And then you can see the Mexican kids looking in. It looks like they've got bars up, so it looks like they're being they're in jail, or they're being kept out of having fun. And then having to watch and first of all, look at that ugly sign. And then watch these kids and trying to understand what makes those kids better. And then I think about what it does to those white kids, making them think that they're better because of the color of their skin. It's just really sad. So the family comes together, and they decide to file a lawsuit. The dad keeps organizing and is able to get more families to join. And so in the end, I think there's 5 total families that join this lawsuit across Orange County, California. And that way it kind of shows it's not just the one school, it's across the county that this is happening. And there's a way to kind of represent, hey, this really needs to change for all of these kids. The thing that I think is really cool is just how the whole family comes together to fight this. And then we're going to see how a larger community comes together to help them out, to advocate. I thought this was a pretty powerful picture because, the Mendez family owns a farm. So while I heard Sylvia's dad is out trying to get people to sign petitions, trying to get people to join the lawsuit, her mom runs the farm. She stays home. If there's a problem, she takes care of it. She makes sure she's out on the tractor doing what her dad would do if he was there. So I just think it's cool to see not how hard Mr. Mendez worked, but the sacrifices that Miss Mendez made as well for her children. And so they go to court, they go on trial, and they finally get an answer from the school board or from the superintendent of why the kids can't go to school. And it's basically the superintendent says that he thinks that white students are superior to Mexicans. And he says all kinds of demeaning things in the court hearing. And the thing that I think is Duncan Tunatia, when he was doing his research, he actually read the court documents and took phrases and took the testimony from the court hearings and summarized it to put it in the book. And I think this was good. I think it's a very powerful message for kids to hear, and I think kids can handle it. To see how ugly racism can be, and to think about the power of words and how that can hurt somebody, and to think about how awful it is to make these stereotypes. The whole time that this superintendent is saying things about, why white children are inferior, or white people are inferior, are superior to Mexicans, has thoughts in her head thinking this isn't true. This is crazy. They talk about the superintendent, for example, says he said that he sent children to the Mexican school to help them improve their English. That is a lie, thought Sylvia. Her English was as good as the English of any of the children at the Westminster school. Do you give the children any tests? Asked Mr. Marcus. Mr. Kent, that's the superintendent, claimed he did. We do so by talking to them. That is another lie, Sylvia wanted to yell. No one had questioned her. They rejected her from the Westminster school without asking her a thing. So I just think about how frustrating that had to be, sitting there in that courtroom, listening to this man lie and say things about her and her family, and saying these demeaning comments that aren't true. Saying things like they generally have dirty hands, face, neck, and ears, which is, ridiculous and crazy. Her dad was an upstanding businessman. It's awful. And it shows a picture of the family having to sit and listen as he says these things. You can see the shock on their faces. Their mouths are open. Her little brother's hands in the air. She's got her hands crossed over her, frustrated. So they got an answer of why they weren't allowed after trying to get that, but it's not an answer that anybody wants to hear. It's an ugly answer. But then they got their chance to testify. And it was pretty cool. They had one student who was 14 years old. She came up and testified. She was from a school in El Modena. She spoke perfect English. Her name was Carol Torres. It was clear that she had not been sent to the Mexican school because she had problems speaking the language, as the defense lawyers claimed. And so I just thought, they also had some education specialists talk about why segregation is bad, and how it causes, for instance, people of color to feel inferior, and how it causes these white kids to feel privileged and more superior because of their color of skin. And, we live in a country that is very diverse. And it's founded on that. And so it blows my mind that we still have systems in place that set it up to have people feel this way. And this book really confronts that, and makes you think about education today and how we still see schools that are segregated today. So one more picture. I keep wanting to show pictures. Basically, in the end, what happens is the judge from the first court case, Judge Paul McCormick, takes a year to give the decision. He says he does it in favor of the Mendez family, and said that public education needs to be open for all, regardless of lineage. Well, the schools repeal it. Appeal it, not repeal it. And so then it goes to a higher court. Here, this is where a community of people come together. And so during the appeal process, people from all over the U.S. send in letters, different groups. And I just love this picture. I think this is awesome because it shows people from all backgrounds, from different places, sending in letters to help fight this fight. And I think the cool thing about this, I mean, is this is in 1947. And so 7 years before the Brown versus Education court case. And it's interesting to me because you don't hear about this story. And it's such a landmark case that helped open the gates for schools to be integrated. And so here it says, during the appeal, the Mendez family received support from the League of United Latin American Citizens, the National Association for Advancement of Colored People, the Japanese American Citizen Leagues, the American Jewish Congress, and other organizations. These groups sent letters with information relevant to the case and asked the judge to rule in favor of the Mendez family. Sylvia was amazed that people of different backgrounds from different parts of the country who had never met her family were getting involved in the case and trying to help them. But her mother said, when you fight for justice, others will follow. And I think that's one of my favorite lines from this book. When you fight for justice, others will follow. On April 15th, 1947, the judges in the Court of Appeals in San Francisco ruled in favor of the Mendez family again. That June, Governor Earl Warren signed the law that said all children in California were allowed to go to school together, regardless of race, ethnicity, or language. And so another cool thing about this book are some of the historical people that are mentioned in it. So Earl Warren, who was governor of California, signed the law. Later, when we're looking at Brown versus the Board of Education, Earl Warren was the Supreme Court justice that ruled in favor of Brown. And then also, it doesn't say anything about this in here, but one of the people that was that wrote the letters, when it's talking about how the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People sent letters in, Thurgood Marshall, who was the lawyer for Brown versus Board of Education, he actually was a member of the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, and he wrote a letter, actually multiple letters, arguing that segregation was bad and why, and sent them in favor of the Mendezes to the judge, and later used a lot of the arguments that he wrote in those letters as arguments in the Brown versus Board of Education case. So I think this is just a really cool book to highlight a historical event that I don't think it's told and that should be told. And so in the end, there's a really cool author's note. Some of the information I just gave you came from that, talking about Thurgood Marshall and Earl Warren. There's some beautiful pictures of Sylvia, her parents, the actual school that they went to. And so it shows the Westminster School and then Hoover Elementary School. And then Sylvia talks about, how important it was for her as she got older for this story to get out, because she wanted people to know about the fight her family put up, especially to honor her parents who are no longer living. There's a nice glossary with terms in it, because some of the language in here, kids might not know what the terms mean. A really cool bibliography talking about some of the how Duncan Tonatia did some of the research and where he got the information for the book. He did a really awesome job doing his research on the story. And then there's something else in here I wanted to point out. Oh, and there's some cool listings on the bibliography, some really cool websites to check out that I had looked at. But talking about, before Brown versus the Board of Education, there's an NPR story to check out. And then Sylvia Mendez actually has a personal website that is worth looking at. And It also talks about how she ended up getting the Presidential Medal of Freedom um, by President Obama in 2010, which is really awesome. That's one of the highest, I think it is the highest award that, hold on one second while I find this. Uh, One of the highest awards you can get um, as a, why can't I find it? Yeah, highest civilian award a person can receive in America. That's what I was trying to say by President Obama. Um, so now that I've talked about the book and talked about how this book uses counter storytelling to show how racism existed, how it still exists. If you read the author's notes, he talks about some statistics that are still happening in schools. It says, I'm just going to read this because I think it's important to think about it, and I think this would be a great study to go into with students. So after reading this book, actually reading some articles, and I found a bunch. There's podcasts talking about how segregation still exists in the U.S. So it says, and this is from Duncan Tonatia. According to a 2012 study by the Civil Rights Project at the University of California, Los Angeles, across the United States, segregation has increased significantly in recent years. It reported that 43% of Latino students and 38% of Black students attend schools where fewer than 10% of their classmates are white. The study, which analyzes data from the Department of Education, also reveals that Latina and Black children are twice as likely to be in school, where the majority of students are poor. Therefore, their schools are likely to have fewer resources and less experienced teachers. All too often, I see this inequality when I visit schools in different parts of the country to read and to talk about my books. So that was one of the reasons that, one of the things that inspired him to write this book. And I want to show you just a couple of websites I found, and I'm going to put links at the bottom of my blog. So I'm going to just share. How do I do this? This is what I want to do. I want to share my screen with you. The first thing I want to show you is Duncan Tonatia's website. It gives you a little background about him. He is both Mexican and American. He grew up in Mexico. His father is American and his mom is Mexican. He went to school in New York City, to Parsons School of Design, and that is where he got his inspiration for the books, his illustrations. He bases them on pre-Columbian art, and then particularly the Miztex Codex. And there's an interview that I'm going to show you. We're not going to listen to it, but an interview that I think would be cool to listen to with students, talking about how he met a man while living in New York City and was introduced to a Meztec community in New York. So it was a group of indigenous people from Mexico that had moved from Mexico to New York City and had built a community there. He got to know this man and got to learn about this artwork, and it has inspired him to use the style that he does now in his books. So I thought that was really cool. But his website's neat. There's some cool videos, some really awesome images to look at. And he has some clothing that you can, there's a store that shows all the books he's written. He makes apparel that I think is really cool. I want to get a t-shirt, but he screen prints these with some of his artwork on it. On teachingbooks.net, he does a little introduction talking about how to pronounce his name. If you go over here, you can go to his page, and it's got some different interviews that you can check out. And I think that's where I found one of the interviews that I'm going to show you. Yeah. But it talks about meet the author, reading the book. Here's a reading of Separate is Never Equal. And then I found this. This is really cool. It's an interview of Duncan Tunatia, talking about why he wrote the book and his inspiration for the book and how he learned about the story. And so I think this would be something cool and worth playing for students when doing a book study. Here is an educator's guide I found on the book, and I'm going to post it. Like I said, I'm going to post links to all this stuff below this vlog. But this is great. There's some great ideas in this educator's guide. I really like this interview. It's him talking about why he thinks more brown faces are needed in children's books. He discusses many of his different books that he has written. And it's cool going back to what I was talking about, how he uses counter storytelling to confront racism. This interview goes into that even more. If you go down to the bottom, he talks about a lot of his different books. But he talks about paying tribute to the ancient art of the Mixtecs that I was talking about earlier. Here he talks about separate is never equal, and talks about how he trying to condense the story, because it's a pretty big story. It's a court case, and he's having to look at all these documents. And so he does an awesome job in the book of condensing it. And then here, I want to read this because I thought it was pretty powerful, looking at why he wrote the book and how this book deals with discrimination and racism. It says, one thing I appreciated so much about the story was how it dealt with discrimination and racism in a way I haven't seen often in children's books. You talk about being able to discern between what's fair and what's not fair. And I remember as a child thinking similarly like Sylvia, but not fully understanding why. People will ask me sometimes when I go to a school, why were they like that? Or when did this start? I don't know what to exactly answer them either. You know, that was a way that people acted and felt at the time, and it took courageous people to ask why, to stand up against it, and to do something about it. I don't really have an answer of why, but I try to give an example of something that can be done about it. I have an author's note about a study that shows that segregation in U.S. schools has increased in the last decade. African American and Latina children are twice as likely to go into a school where a majority of the students are poor, where less than 10% of the students are white, and therefore they go to schools that are more crowded, have less resources, and have some of the same problems that the Mendez family was facing 70 years ago. Hopefully the book can serve as a kind of encouragement that something can be done. And I want to end there because I just think that's so powerful. These are the kind of books that I want to read to my students. I want my students to realize that they can make a difference. There's ugliness in this world, and there's beauty in this world, and that we can use our strength and our kindness and empathy and our gifts to bring more beauty in the world and fight the ugliness that's here. And I just think that this book is an awesome book to show kids that something can be done. So I'll end there, and I hope you all enjoy this. And like I said, I will post some of those resources that I showed you below my vlog. Have